Hello everyone and welcome once again to Randomosity Ramble. Today we will once again take to the Ask Reddit subreddit, and I've found an interesting topic here that we can talk about. I've skimmed through the comments and it seems like there's some pretty good and amusing stories here, and so let's get into it. So somebody asked this question. Bouncers of Reddit, have you ever crossed paths with someone you've had to throw out of a club or bar? How was the experience? One person said, I was a bouncer years and years ago. I had to throw out a friend of mine. He didn't pick fights or anything, but was becoming abusive to the staff. When he sobered up, he felt really bad about it and came back to apologize. That must have been really tough for anyone who was it that wrote this comment, because as we all know, mixing private and professional life is rarely a good idea, and it seems that this person had to throw out their friend, no less. But I guess it all ended up solving itself, because his friend felt bad after sobering up and realized that he did a bad thing, and that it seems that the incident didn't cause a strain in their relationship. Somebody else said, I did some work bouncing in the early 90s and had to throw a couple of guys out for getting hammered and harassing the bar girls. Well, after work, I was walking to my car and heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and it was those two guys from earlier. I figured out it was going to be a fight, but they wanted to thank me. Turns out one of them had a sister who had been assaulted some years before. They said once they sobered up and realized they were acting inappropriately with the girls on staff, they felt bad. This must have been frightening for the bouncer in question, because imagine walking to your car after work I suppose it was early morning. It had to be early morning if he was bouncing, after the night was over and everything. So imagine walking to your car, hearing footsteps behind you. Probably, on empty, deserted streets, as it is early morning, not many people walking around town at that time. So imagine turning around and seeing the guys you had to throw up walking after you. But it's pretty interesting how they actually wanted to thank him. And he did say that one of the guys said that he had a sister who had been assaulted during some time ago. So yeah, when you have a personal experience with something, it makes you more sensitive to the thing, to whatever you have experience with. And it looks like this guy recognized that he did the same thing to the girls on staff that happened to his sister, and he wanted it helped him realize that what he did wasn't appropriate. So I guess a good story here, because it teaches you that having experience with certain things will make you more aware of what you are doing in certain situations. Okay, let's see further. Someone said, many years ago, one of my relatives got traumatized in college by a horrific incident involving a bouncer and a patron. She was on a first date at a local sports bar, and an off-duty bouncer from a different bar or club that knew her date happened to walk in. He came over and said hi and joined them at the table. A bit later, a guy the bouncer had ejected before walked up and, this is really, I didn't expect this. So anyway, a bit later, a guy the bouncer had ejected before walked up and shot him in the back of the head. My relative said it was an out of nowhere deafening boom, and randomly the bouncer's head going flying forward to the table. A few seconds of shock and then people screaming and some running as it sets in. She was in nursing school at the time and mustered what little sense she could and yelled for someone to give her a shirt so she could put it on the back of his head while someone called 911. She told me he lived, disabled for life but lived. She never went on a date with that first guy again. She knows it wasn't his fault, she just couldn't bring herself to do it. Wow, so this is a really dark one. I didn't expect to find something like this, especially happening to a bouncer that wasn't on duty. And, it's horrific how he was just doing his job, throwing out a person who was probably deserved it. I mean, we can definitely assume that the person deserved it, and that same person coming back after that bouncer was after his shift, while he was off duty, and shooting him in the back for just throwing him out. Really horrific stuff, as the person themselves said. Okay, let's see. Someone said, I've bounced off and on for about 15 years in the same mid-sized city, about 150,000 people. One night, as people were leaving, this guy sucker punched another patron right inside the door. Several other people quickly got involved. I grabbed Mr. Sucker Punch and he spins around and squares up with me. I guess because I'm tall, 6'6", people always seem to try and rush me and wrestle me by the waist. Mr. Sucker Punch was no different. We end up wrestling for a second before I finally get a solid grip on him. He's still trying to fight at this point. I end up picking him up and throwing him through the exit doors, breaking one of them off the hinges. About a week later, I'm out to eat with my mom, of all people, and in walks Mr. Sucker Punch, and sits down 2 tables over. I wasn't particularly worried about it, but I really didn't want to have to beat someone up in front of my mom. About 5 minutes later, I see him talking to the waitress, and she makes her way over to our table. That guy over there said you threw him through a door the other night at the bar. He wanted to tell you he's sorry for being a dumb drunk. So this is turned out to be one of the funny stories. I mean, funny. It's not funny when somebody sucker punches someone else and you have to, as a bouncer, deal with him. But it seems he came to his senses. Thanking the guy and everything. I thought that maybe going into the store he was going to pay him and his mom for dinner, but I guess that would be too much to ask from Mr. Sucker Punch. But apologizing was nice. All right. Another person said it happened fairly frequently with the regulars. So to this guy it happened with the regulars. As long as they weren't fighting, they'd be allowed back in the next night. Usually they were pretty embarrassed and apologized for being a drunken jackass. One time I did have to kick out a good friend because he got in a fight. He was in a bad place and was pretty embarrassed by the whole thing. We didn't really talk about it much afterwards. That was over a decade ago, and we're still friends today, and he's settled down and doesn't drink like he used to. Okay, so this is another one of the friend stories, and it seems like their friendship wasn't afflicted by the incident either, which is always nice to hear. Another Redditor said, my buddy owned a bar. My buddy owned a bar where they had a way of dealing with regulars who got out of hand on occasion. They used to say they would 68 people instead of 86. It didn't mean you were banned, it just meant you couldn't come back for a while, like a suspension for a month or two depending on the infraction, just to let the other people cool down and decide that they weren't pissed off at you anymore. So this actually seems like a good way of dealing with patrons who are regulars, but tend to make problems. Very creative, I have to say. Someone said I might have to borrow that one. Okay. Let's see. This seems like an interesting one. Talon QR, that's his nickname, said ex-chicken shop worker here. What's that you say, chicken shop worker? We asked for bouncers. Well, working in a chicken shop in a shitty neighborhood full of leads and iced-out bogans means I practically was a bouncer. One night, two dudes come in clearly drunk or drugged out. They start discussing what they want. Eventually, their conversation grows wild with energy and pure hatred, as man number one argues with man number two over whether they should get a bunch of chicken nuggets or 2 chickens off the rack. This argument turns into a full-on brawl as man number two presses man number one's face against the Bane Mary. I don't know what the Bane Mary is. Knocking our dear friend Henry, the rooster, a little statue we kept on the top of the Bane Mary, onto the floor. Anyway, if you know what a Bane Mary is, tell me in the comments. Knocking our dear friend Henry the rooster onto the floor where he shattered into pieces before my very eyes. Fearing for my co-worker's safety, I grabbed man number two and shoved him outside, where man number one eagerly follows, punching on his friend, taking the opportunity as he apparently thinks I've opened for him. Locked the store doors, called the police, and watched as man number two yet again gets the upper hand on man number one and begins kicking the shit out of him. Funnily enough, 2 weeks later I come across man number one and man number two in a line at McDonald's. I didn't think they recognized me until I sat down to eat my food and overheard one of them say, "Yo, isn't that the chicken cunt?" After hearing that, I promptly left with both direction and magnitude. Rest in pieces, Henry, you will be missed. It's funny how he says rest in pieces, Henry, considering that it was a porcelain statue which shattered in pieces. Yeah, this is really an interesting one. I wouldn't, it seems as this guy described it that man number two was beating man number one pretty hard, and I wouldn't think that those two would stay friends after that happening, but this guy says he saw them in a McDonald's 2 weeks later, waiting in a line, so I guess their fight didn't affect their friendship whatsoever. They probably fought each other at some other places later on too. Okay. Let's see. Lost Afropic said, "Haven't been a bouncer in about 15 years, but funny story from when I was. A guy I threw out and had to manhandle roughly. He was trying to hit me and other people. Came back the next day, not to start trouble or get in again, but merely to apologize and go. Seeing someone genuinely sorry was a very rare experience. He said, and I quote, 'I know I was a bit of a cunt and needed a slap. I know I'm banned. I was off my nuts and just wanted to say sorry and no hard feelings.' It stuck with me because he really meant it. It really doesn't go like that most of the time." Okay. Let's see. Not a bouncer, but a former bartender. I had to call the cops on a couple who had become angry and violent during a Sunday brunch. Both were arrested. The husband threw a glass at me, but the wife started swinging at the cop, so she got the worst of it. Rumor has it the husband was released later that day, but the wife spent a few days in jail. A few weeks later, I was in Walmart and spotted the couple. The wife didn't see me, but the husband did. We both walked away in opposite directions without saying a word, but truth be told, I was terrified. So really, when you work at such places like clubs and even restaurants and bars, some pretty, both weird, funny, but also bad and dangerous stuff can happen to you, as can be seen from the stories we're reading here. Let's see further. Okay, so this is a bit longer one. This person said no, so they didn't work as a bouncer, but it was specifically not interacting with the person that makes all the difference in my story. Also important to note that I'm not a professional bouncer. This was my first time bouncing, and only did it because I was dead broke. I worked some random dive bar and everything was fine going into the night. Mostly regulars and a couple randos just having a good time. This table of about 6 people were getting a little loud and taking shot after shot. I kept my eye on them, but they didn't do anything to warrant an intervention. An hour before close, as the group goes up to the bar to close their tabs, a guy and the girl in the group started arguing, and the guy pours his Corona all over the girl. Interesting that the beer in question is Corona, considering that we're in the middle of a coronavirus crisis. Anyway, as I walk up to eject them, the guy turns his beer bottle around and holds it like a weapon, and taunts me to come at him. My inexperience as a bouncer probably plays a hand in this next decision, because I still wonder what the right move as a bouncer would have been. I rush him and overpower him and hold him down until he's calm. I escort him out and talk to him outside. He tries to walk back in after I tell him to have a good night. He starts getting physical again, but this time he knocks me onto my back and gets on top of me. I have no idea why he didn't ground and pound me right there. We tussle for a bit, and at this point I've pulled his braids. We're both choked each other, and we're both scraped up and bleeding. His group eventually comes out and pulls him away, and they all leave. I go back in and make sure all the patrons left and pick up the chairs and tables we've knocked over. We also broke the bar's front door in the scuffle. I go home and clean up and wake up with bumps and bruises and work the door again the next day. The same group comes in, but without the guy. They end up talking to me, the girl thanks me, I don't know why, and the other guys tell me how lucky I am because that was the day he left his house without his gun. Apparently, they all met up at one of their friends' house before going out, and the guy mentioned how pissed he was he left it at home. I quit that night and never bounced again. $60 and some chicken wings a night is not worth losing my life over. Yeah, it's not. Wow, imagine that. Practically a coincidence ended up possibly saving this person's life. And, hearing stories like this really makes you think what kind of crazy people, mad people are out there, Imagine being mad about forgetting your gun, not taking it with you. What are you even doing with the gun walking around bars getting drunk? Really, really horrible. Alright. Well, I think that would be all for today. I hope you found some of these stories interesting, and tell me what you think in the comments. Alright, see you next time. Bye.